Welcome to another episode of Doodling Through Education for my CC students. This is Cycle 1, Week 12, History. And that just means for everyone else that we are going to be talking about the Muslim Empire. And so if you haven't already, go ahead and hop on over to doodlingthrougheducation.com. There's a link in the description. You can grab your workbooks that go along with each of these videos. Like I've said in the past, there's 4 worksheets per week per subject, and you can buy them quarterly as well if you would prefer to do it that way. Without further ado, let's start doodling. So we are going to go back in time to the year 570. Most of the people in Arabia of that day were members of clans and were part of tribes. During this time, a man named Muhammad was born. He was born in the year 570, and he was the founder of a religion called Islam. Now, Islam is one of the world's major religions, so it is important that we learn about it, even though as Christians we know it is not correct. Well, Muhammad was born in a city called Mecca, and this is now Saudi Arabia, and it is also considered the holiest city of Islam. As Muhammad grew, from time to time, he would like to spend nights in a cave near Mecca, reflecting on the city that he lived in. He worried about the social problems taking place. In 610 specifically, when he was 40 years old, he claimed to have seen a vision that he said was the angel Gabriel. And he believed this vision was a message from God, and that he himself had been chosen as the messenger of Allah. Now, Allah is Arabic for the word God. He claims for the rest of his life to have received inspired messages from Allah, and many of them were actually put down into writing. And eventually these messages were collected into a book called the Quran, which is now the holy book of Islam. When Muhammad claimed to receive these messages, he began to go around proclaiming that Allah was the only God. He would go around preaching this to the city leaders, and this was a threat to the city leaders because at the time it was quite unusual for Arabs to believe in only one God. And so many people in Muhammad's own hometown of Mecca really disliked this new religion because of this belief. And these city leaders plotted to kill him. And so in 622, Muhammad and his followers ran away to Medina. And in Medina, Muhammad began to practice this new religion of Islam. What's interesting about this religion is that Muhammad really borrowed many different elements from Judaism and Christianity. He believed that Muslims were the descendants of Abraham through Ishmael, and therefore were descendants of Abraham's first son. 8 years later, he returned to Mecca with his followers, destroying the city's idols, and declared Mecca to be a holy city. And it was at this time that it became governed by the laws of Islam. And so eventually he was able to persuade most of the people of Arabia to practice Islam. Muhammad died in the year 632, and it was at this point that some chaos happened because Muslims disagreed as to who should lead them. Eventually, Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali, became the Muslim leader, or Caliph. And this marked the beginning of when Caliphs emerged in Islam, and these were leaders of Islam. At this time, the Caliphs then called for jihad, which means a holy war against their neighbors that were not followers of Islam in many places like Syria, Persia, and Egypt. And the purpose of these jihads were to gain political control over the society so that they could be run using these different Islamic principles. Well, the Islamic Empire continued to expand throughout the Middle Ages and became one of the largest empires in the history of the world. It spread to the Western Mediterranean, as well as the Middle East and Northern Africa, as well as what is now Spain and parts of Asia and into India. It would have spread all the way up into France, but the king of the Franks, Charles Martel, was able to rally his people and defend France against these Muslim invaders. One battle in particular, called the Battle of Tours, was fought and marks the turning point for Charles Martel and the Muslims in this struggle. According to many stories, when the Franks came to defend the city, the Arabs actually turned away from the battle to protect their treasures and the things that they had stolen. This left their general unprotected, and so the Franks were able to attack, and when this happened, the Islamic army fled. This was a very important battle because this made it possible for Charles Martel's grandson Charlemagne to unite most of Western Europe. And Charlemagne was actually one of the first Holy Roman emperors and was responsible for a lot of the growth of Christianity. So even though Charles Martel was able to halt the northward expansion of the Islamic Empire in 722, the period that lasted between 750 and 1350 still is considered to be the golden age of Islam, which was a very successful time for Muslims. Now, in the 900s, there were a group of people called the Turks, and they migrated into the Islamic Empire. Many of them actually did convert to Islam and quickly gained political power in this area. And in 1071, the Turks were able to capture Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is a very important city to Christianity and Judaism, as well as Islam, and it is called the Holy Land. Well, for then the next 2 centuries, the Muslims fought off Christian attempts to win back the Holy Land in a series of wars that were known as the Crusades. Come the year 1200, another group of Muslim Turks called the Ottomans began an empire. And it was the Ottomans that eventually ruled over North Africa and the Middle East, as well as southeastern Europe, for hundreds of years. Well, this fighting over Jerusalem during the Crusades really did weaken the Islamic Empire, and so did Mongol invasions from the east. The final blow to the Golden Age of Islam happened during the 14th century when the Black Death spread along the Silk Road and destroyed great cities of Baghdad and Mecca. And that's all we have for today. Be sure to do your 4 worksheets of homework. Rewatch this video if you need to be reminded of some of the facts that you need to complete those worksheets. Again, you can find those at doodlingthrougheducation.com. And remember to be kind, follow God's will, and take care. Bye.